Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years. And they offer training and assessments in their facility as well as remote options available. And I want to share some insights that came to light for me when I was working specifically in college football that for me were surprising. And I don't know if that's a positive thing or not, the fact that I was exposed to these types of things in what, we would all consider like elite athletics. But I think it's worth talking about. I think it's worth having a conversation about. Just the fact that I was otherwise, blind to these types of things, I think says a lot anyway. But so I just want to actually just kind of open up this conversation, get this going, because I think there's a lot here to talk about. But what I mean about this whole topic here is really about the reality of health equity and food insecurity and how very real this is just systemically across different communities, across different demographics. And it's very much present and prevalent in these areas that we wouldn't otherwise think of. And so I'll just give, at least from my perspective as a dietitian, working in other areas, like working in community health, for instance, and community nutrition, and putting out like grocery store tours for the community, and where I had this emphasis at that point in time under those projects to try to work with and work through these different problem areas related to food scarcity or to a lack of access and availability of fresh produce. So in certain food deserts, for instance. And so there's an entire initiative, an entire, process of thinking and trying to problem solve and create solutions for that entire, if you want to think of it as like an entire field of work that's being done. But what I was surprised, and I don't know if this is unfortunate that I was surprised, or the fact that this is the reality that is just not addressed, that we just put blinders on and don't pay attention to, is the fact that everything that I, at that point in time in my young career, I viewed community nutrition and that entire field of what those problem areas are and what the solutions are to a very specific community, a very specific population, a very specific area or location. And it never occurred to me that it happens everywhere, that it is absolutely everywhere, and that everywhere you go, the people you are interacting with, regardless of whatever professional organization you're part of or whatever the field is that you're working in or working for, that the whether or not it's current or the aftermath of growing up in situations where that was the reality, the thing is, this is the probably largest unspoken problem that is not given the attention it deserves. And it's because I think what I just explained, how we view it through this very narrow lens of what it is and who it affects and what that looks like. And I think if we start to remove those blinders, remove the rose-colored glasses, if you will, and start to view everything and everyone as a either current situation that they might be going through or as the end result of situations that they were going through that put them in this position where they're in some way at a disadvantage to others, and there's no blame or judgment or shame that should ever be directed in that route. It's instead the fact that we have not identified the fact that this impacts so many people, and that fact that it impacts those who we would not even consider, because we've been so biased in how we view these problem areas. So I just got off on a little bit of a tangent there, and I'm about to go off a little bit more. So what I mean about how this became it was absolutely hard to ignore once I got into college football. And I'm going to explain to you what this means and why that is. So as a dietitian, when you're working with a team in college football, you have all of these athletes, And for the sake of conversation on this topic, all of these athletes are, at least the athletes who are the underclassmen, so like your freshmen and sophomores, are allowed to have these meal plans. They're given these meal plans. They're supposed to have these meal plans. And so it's a set amount of money that all of these athletes have to be able to spend on food. And it's very specific for food. And I actually was very fortunate to work with an organization where they had these meal plans set up on apps that were synced up to or kind of partnered with different food, I was going to say different like food distribution areas, but it's not like they're getting food directly from a supplier. It's like different restaurants and cafes and grocery stores. And so there's different areas where they can purchase food from with their like, it's almost like a debit card, if you will, like using their meal plan money to purchase food from these different sources. And it's all preset at the beginning of the semester. And once the semester ends, then it's reset again with that same amount that is agreed upon for everyone for the full semester. And if this is where I started to see the reality of how this plays out, though. So if someone had used all of their money for food, and this is all specific for food, there's no way to use this money for anything else other than food. It's all been pre-approved through this app, right? So if someone were to spend all of their meal plan money before the semester ends, then they would come to me and I would have to ask for more funding for them for the remaining few weeks of the semester to get them through, so that way they still have those funds to use for food. And this was very often a dispute that I would have to have. And some of the responses that I would get when I would explain that, hey, these athletes, they have run out of their meal plan funding. They still have another few weeks of the semester. We need to provide some additional funding, some supplemental funding for the remaining few weeks. And some of the responses I would get, back was that, well, we're not going to give them any more money. They're probably just using it to buy their friends food. And that right away, I'm like, well, no, that's not true. Like we have complete oversight over what they're spending on. And I can see very clearly that they're buying their own food. It's just that food is expensive. And there's inflation is not always within our control. And if we're giving a set amount of money to spend on food for a length of time, but the prices of food are all over the place, or just the price of food in general being higher than what we anticipated, now you're spending money and you didn't anticipate that it would cost you that much money to buy food. So that's an entirely different thing though. But so I just having that response in return bothered me a little bit, because it's putting a lot of judgment and blame and shame on an individual, first of all. So we're just going to leave that right there. But then on top of that, so this is a very unique experience that I'm grateful, so beyond grateful that I had this experience, because it opened my eyes that much more. So like I just explained about the whole semester thing with having an amount of money that is loaded onto your meal plan to use for food, and it's very specific for food. So this was during the year of 2020 when everything got shut down, everyone was sent home, and every organization, every business, everyone was trying to figure out what to do, how to handle these situations, what to maybe cut from budget right away because you don't know how long you're shut down for. How do you help other people, and what can you give out and help to supplement for other people because everyone's struggling? So very difficult period of time with a lot of unique decisions that are being made that are otherwise different from normal operating procedures. And that's, again, across industries, across organizations, across businesses. So what happened with this organization at that point in time? So everything gets shut down, everyone's sent home, and there was a decision that whatever was remaining for those who had their meal plans, they basically had this money sitting in this account that they wouldn't otherwise be able to use because they were at home for the rest of the semester. So the decision was to liquidate those funds for them so that they had that spending money that would have otherwise been theirs anyway. And so this is what was very interesting for me. Having all of the funds liquidated And now each of these individuals are getting that money back as just cash. And I was in the position where I was the one who saw all of these amounts that were being redistributed back towards those individuals, and to have those conversations with them that, hey, this is the amount of money that you're going to be receiving from your meal plan dollars being liquidated back to you. And so the difference I'll say first, some of those individuals were receiving all of their meal plan money back because they never spent a dollar of it. They never spent any of it. The reason why is because they didn't have to. They were receiving funding from some other sources, whether it was family, whether it was just their own money. They in some way had that money already available to them or already provided to them. So they did not need this money that was coming from the university for food. So they never touched it. So they are receiving literally thousands of dollars in cash as just a bonus. Now, on the other end of this, individuals who were using that meal plan money because they needed to, because it was their source of funding for food, and they were relying on that. They didn't have any other source of funding for food. They didn't have any other outside financial support to help them buy food. They were relying on that. They were now receiving next to nothing. It could be 20 cents that was being liquidated back to them. These are the individuals that I would have had to fight for additional funding to help them because they were running out of funding anyway. And the difference between seeing this basically cash bonus in thousands of dollars going to those who really didn't need it versus nothing going to those who absolutely needed it. And when I explained to administration, the actual decision makers about this contrast, and I said, I don't feel comfortable with this because this is not equitable. And I explained to them exactly what it would be to make a more equitable approach to this. And that what has been happening as this equal across the board approach of giving everyone the same dollar amount, assuming that they're all, first of all, starting from the same place, that they all have the same access to the same resources and everything, and that all else is equal, the reality is that's not real. The reality is you need an equitable approach. And so explaining this scenario and the problems with it and asking for solutions, asking for decision makers to help me come up with a more equitable solution, because this isn't right. There are people, and this is, I think, the biggest thing that wasn't really being taken seriously. I was explaining to them entirely that it's not just that this is the fact that there's a demographic distinction here was clear as day. Clear as day. But the fact that this is all one team. And so this approach of everyone gets equal treatment, everyone gets equal resources, everyone gets everything equal because we're a team and we do everything together. I had to have that conversation really on repeat with the decision makers and the administration, explaining that not everyone is equal, and you have to acknowledge that. You have to respect that. You have to lean into that. If you want everyone to end up at an equal outcome, then you have to approach it from an equitable distribution of resources, not this all is equal and all is fair then. And I'm about to get real fired up, so I got to calm myself down as I'm explaining this. Because the fact that, like I said, there's a very clear, distinct difference in demographics between who is receiving the amount of funding that they're receiving and who isn't. But it's not just that they're receiving different amounts. It's the fact that they're not receiving what is the equitable solution for what it is that they need. They all have basic needs. Everyone has basic needs that need to be met. And in this case, we're failing. We're not hitting the mark on meeting everyone's basic needs because we're putting blinders on and assuming that if all is equal and all is fair, then that's how it goes. But that's not fair. That's not equal. That's only furthering and deepening this gap, this wealth gap, and this health gap, because it's those who are continually not being able to meet their basic needs. They're continually being put in this situation where they are in survival mode, really. They're continually below their basic needs, and the those who are absolutely satiated and satisfied, they have everything they need, it's sufficient, they're just continuing to get cash bonuses. And like, besides that literal example, it's the difference in those who are not even able to meet their basic needs are still then placed to the same level of expectation to perform as those who are. So this entire team is all expected equally to perform to the same degree of intensity, the same degree of severity, and to be able to all have the same level of safety playing this field, playing in this field, playing this sport, when the reality is they're not. And there's a very real difference in who ends up more likely to be injured, who ends up having more likely to have injuries that are not only season-ending or career-ending, but that are lifelong injuries. And it's because they're playing this sport under this umbrella assumption with rose-colored glasses on that they are all equal and all one team playing the same thing and it's all honky-dory and happy. The reality is they're not. Some of those individuals are in a chronic state of survival mode. They're in a chronic stress response, and they're being kept to the same expectation as the others who are not in that same position. There is a need to identify that everyone is in fact different, and we have to respect that and allow ourselves to remove this belief that fair and equal is actually fair, that equality is what is fair, and that doing everything we can to meet not only the basic needs of those who are not having them met, but to actually funnel our resources, our support, funnel everything that we can to bring them back up to a place where they're no longer held at this distinct disadvantage at all times. There's no possible way that we can expect those individuals to ever be able to get ahead on this cycle if we're continuing to look the other way. So yeah, I hope that opens up some thoughts in your mind about just the reality of college football. We'll say that, but really just it's the fact that there's so much that is happening that we need to be woken up to it. We really need to be awakened to this reality that we keep turning a blind eye to what is very real. It's the very real distinct difference across people that I think needs to be not only addressed and acknowledged, but now finding the solutions to better support the outcomes that we want. We don't want to have this further distancing and deepening of this gap between individuals and what they're in the most literal sense capable of doing because of what they have to offer and what they have to give. I think the best route as a solution, and this is what I was proposing in this entire situation, of a redistribution of not only funds, so redistributing the financial, you have this bucket of cash sitting here, let's redistribute it out in a more equitable fashion, but also a need to approach redistribution in general as an overarching theme that so for instance, with food scarcity, there is food that exists right now in excess, and it's kept in certain locations and behind a certain price point that those who can afford it and those who have access to it get to it. And the unfortunate thing with food as a product is that it has a shelf life. So once if that food is not distributed out and purchased by those who can afford it within that time frame, and the food goes bad, then it's just waste. And you've just wasted that entire product. It's not just a product, it's actually life-saving. It's what you need for basic survival, for your basic nutritional status. You need it. So the better alternative to viewing food as this high dollar priced item for those who can afford it is to view a method for redistribution at all points. So that could be redistribution. So from the point of actual food production, the farming industry and the food industry that is producing products and creating different food products, there needs to be a more equitable distribution of those foods and food items across the board. Because right now, fresh produce is typically not distributed out to what are called food deserts. And food deserts, if you want to think of it like this, locations where access to food and access specifically to fresh food and fresh produce is very limited. A lot of the food that is available in those areas ends up being convenience stores, fast food restaurants. So there's limited access and availability in general to food, but specifically to the higher nutrient dense foods that people legitimately need. So if there was instead a better base of support for redistribution from the side of the production side, from the side of the farming, if it was an emphasis on local farming, on urban farming, so that way those who are located in food deserts have their own source of produce that is right there without this need to pay this top dollar for the actual transportation of food across the country from California, for instance. So viewing that perspective of really utilizing local and especially urban farming for those food deserts, that way there is that more, it's close-knit and it's more realistic from a pricing standpoint to be able to obtain all of the fresh produce that can help to supplement the other foods that are available to you. But then going back to what I said about the food purchasing and then food being gone, if it's not purchased, it goes to waste. So that's where you have to align yourself with a redistribution strategy, also known as like a food rescue program, really. So that way, whatever food is near shelf life or near its date where it's safe to consume, that it is at least finding its way to human beings while it is still safe to consume. That way we can eliminate the food waste that is being accumulated, because that's a huge burden on us financially, the amount of food that ends up just going out because it wasn't purchased. But then we also need to view then not only that this redistribution of food that is not purchased, but we have to view the overall inflation of food prices in general. Because like I said in that story, how individuals who had this meal plan money and they were spending it on foods, the price of food at that point in time especially was through the roof. And it was beyond what we could have planned for initially when we were mapping out how much funding to allow for food purchases. The price of food at the store or wherever you're buying it from, that is so sensitive to changes like you would not believe. It's not just inflation, it's also changes from the food production side of things. So if for instance, chickens are sick and there's now a risk for contamination, so humans are not safe to eat certain eggs or chicken from a certain manufacturer, then that takes that supply out of the food industry. And so now you have other options, but now because of supply and demand, that price is going to go up. So I don't want to get too deep in this because there's a whole lot that goes into the food industry, and the fact that it's just difficult because there's so many problems to solve across this topic, and it's all specific to something that people need in order to meet their basic needs. But I think the also difficult side of it is the fact that food as an industry is also a for-profit industry. So there's a need to identify where are the sources of funding and aid and assistance that we can utilize to be able to combat the industry itself and the pricing of the industry, but also finding ways to, in the most equitable fashion possible, to redistribute food, to redistribute funding, and to help promote fresh produce for those who are in otherwise food deserts where they wouldn't have access to it. I just said a whole lot on that whole topic, but hopefully that helped to, I think, just explaining that, I would hope that helps enlighten some people about the fact that just because you're seeing something on TV as a sport, as entertainment, and as, this team that is all unified, that's not always how it is. And I would say probably like 99 to 100% of the time, there's some very real, wide-scale problems that are there that you're just not seeing. because no one wants to really point your eyes in that direction. But the reality is that these problems are very much real. They are very much in need of addressing and in need of problem solving. And hopefully I just gave a few ideas out there so that way, if you are in a position where you are in some way in contact with your local government, with any kind of local community farms or urban farming, if you're in any way affiliated with your local food bank or with your food rescue programs, these are all ways that you can start to get involved yourself and start to get that conversation going, at least locally, wherever it is that you are. So that way there is a system set up that is moving towards that positive impact, moving towards making that progress that is needed, because it's very much needed. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.